And it is time now for the press preview. Our first look at the front pages. Over the next half an hour or so, 25 minutes, we'll be taking a look at the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the Conservative commentator Tim Montgomerie. But first, let's take a look at some of the front pages, and you might detect something of a theme here. The Eye's headline is pretty blunt. Cummings declares war on Johnson as the Prime Minister's former chief advisor issues a scathing rebuke of his ex-boss and denies any involvement in the leaking of private texts. Similarly, the Mail in a fighting mood. Dom's all-out war with the PM. As I said, a theme developing here. The Telegraph saying Cummings declares war on the PM. The tortuous war metaphors continuing in the Times, with Mr Johnson dubbing the Prime Minister unethical and foolish. Here's the FT. Cummings lashes out at Johnson. The paper calls his statement an extraordinary broadside, I should say. Astonishing too to The Guardian, an astonishing attack this time. Meanwhile, The Sun reports that the former footballer Ryan Giggs could be jailed after being charged with assaulting 2 women and with engaging in controlling or coercive behaviour. And The Express chooses to lead with the possibility that we'll be able to ditch wearing masks by this summer. We are joined tonight, as I said, by Susie Boniface and Tim Montgomerie. Guys, lovely to see you both. And, what should we talk about tonight? The weather, the fact we're all at work on a Friday? No, let's talk about Dominic Cummings. The Daily Mail seems a fairly decent place to start, Susie. Just remind us as to the point that we have gotten this story. A rather short blog from Mr Cummings released today, essentially trying to put the boot into the Prime Minister.
Yes. So to sum it up, Marina Hyde from The Guardian has done better than this to me today by saying who would have thought that Dominic Cummings would turn out to be the craziest ex that Boris Johnson had. But to sum it up, the allegations are, firstly, it was your girlfriend's mate's fault. Secondly, the Prime Minister stopped talking to him about his wallpaper in 2020 when he told him he was a criminally insane moron. And thirdly, honestly, says Dominic Cummings, I thought Boris Johnson was completely competent and had loads of integrity. What a surprise this all is to us. And that fundamentally, it just feels like being on the back of the school bus. You know, these are like 12-year-olds who have been texting each other and texting their mates and then texting their mates about the other mates and going, we don't like him anymore, and we don't like him. And that I used to have a night news editor at the Sunday Mirror who would walk around when he came in his night shift and say, what do they do all day? And I am tempted to say the same thing now about the government. What are they doing when they're supposed to be governing? Because they're having some kind of a breakdown.
Tim, what do you make of all of this? I mean, the Daily Mail lead article, in fact, the opening paragraph describes this as an astonishing attack. Now, you can debate whether the astonishing applies to the content of Mr Cummings' allegations or the fact that he has launched an attack on the Prime Minister, because, frankly, plenty of people saw that one coming.
Absolutely. I have mixed views on this story, to be honest. I think Susie and I were previewing the papers a few weeks ago when Alex Salmond launched what supposedly was his devastating attack on Nicola Sturgeon. And now, of course, you know, just a couple of weeks ahead of the Scottish polls, Nicola Sturgeon is still riding high. And so sometimes big attacks don't actually materialise into a change in public opinion. But regardless of whether it's going to resonate in a sort of popular opinion sense, I think what these attacks do point to, and I think they point to something fundamentally questionable about Downing Street, is a very chaotic operation at the very least. It seems to be a Downing Street, and this has certainly been my limited experience of the operation. You know, the Prime Minister is chaotic in how he manages his affairs, and that is not good. More seriously, I think the Prime Minister can get away with that because that's probably something of his reputation. More serious is the idea that somehow money that was donated to the Conservative Party for political purposes was somehow misused in the decoration of Downing Street. And if the HMRC was to sort of get involved and look at the tax implications of that, then we're talking about a much bigger political problem for the Prime Minister. But we're not there yet, so we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. But, 2 weeks ahead of local elections, lots of Tory council candidates will be out tomorrow. They're out today. This is not what they need. This is certainly not good for the Tory prospects in those elections.
Susie, as we kind of have a look at the Eye's front page, and again, Cummings declares war on Johnson. I mean, the line that everyone has focused on in the Dominic Cummings blog, it is sad to see the Prime Minister and his office fall so far below the standards of competence and integrity the country deserves. The problem for Mr Cummings, as I see it in all of this, is that two of the examples, the flat and the friend of the Prime Minister's fiancée, that perhaps he may have interfered in it, he said nothing at the time. In fact, Mr Cummings has only waited until he's been accused by Number 10 of leaking text messages to point out that the competence and integrity that the country deserves wasn't there whilst he was working for the Prime Minister.
Exactly. And I'm sure that's a point that will be made at the Select Committee when he goes before it in a month's time. And he says he'll give it all the time it wants. And this is a man who 2 years ago was found to be in contempt of Parliament for refusing to talk to a Select Committee. I don't think, personal principle is really the issue as far as Dominic Cummings is concerned. Because once you start throwing hand grenades, one is never enough. They're very habit forming. And the issue really is not just what he said here, but what else does he know and he hasn't said. And one of the minds which has come out tonight, and which I find absolutely fascinating, trying to see around the corner on this story and see where it's going to lead to, is the fact that these renovations to the Downing Street flat, apparently, reportedly, anything up to £200,000 was spent on them. Perhaps £58,000 went adrift in terms of that being the amount that Boris Johnson couldn't afford to pay, and it came in from donors and then had to get shuffled around a bit. But Downing Street are now saying that he has footed that bill personally himself. And if that's the case, where has the Prime Minister, who did not have £58,000 a few months ago, managed to come up with £58,000 now to settle the bill, just as the scandal's kicking off? What else does Dominic Cummings know about possible sources of money that are going into or out of Downing Street, and where they're from and what they're for? What else does he know about text messages and WhatsApp messages? Because you can bet your bottom dollar, he's not someone who's stupid enough to have sent them all out the first time round. He'll have someone in his back pocket ready to go, I'm sure, when he's in front of that Select Committee. So on the one hand, it's sort of, tin hats on, I suppose, if you're working in Downing Street. And on the other hand, popcorn for the rest of us.
Tim, and the headline in the Times, again, Dominic Cummings declaring war on unethical, foolish Prime Minister. I mean, we should talk for a second, shouldn't we, about Boris Johnson's judgment in all of this. If Downing Street is correct, and Mr Cummings has denied the allegations, as we should point out, but if Downing Street is correct, Boris Johnson was warned time and again by people you will know very, very well about the man that Mr Cummings was and the way in which he operates and the dangers of putting him so close to the centre of power in your government.
Yeah, Neil, and this is incredibly personal for me. I resigned from any possibility of working for the Prime Minister. And when Sajid Javid, who has been a friend of mine for 30 years, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sajid Javid is one of the few people who've really come out well from this whole affair. He left government because he wasn't willing to put up with how Dominic Cummings was behaving. It was obvious to an awful lot of us that very early on, although Dominic Cummings comes up with brilliant ideas, he was running his affairs in Downing Street in a very totalitarian way. He wasn't listening to other people's advice, and the Prime Minister should have seen that way before he did. And Sajid Javid sacrificed, one of the great offices of state in order to warn the Prime Minister that this situation was intolerable. So, yes, there are big questions for the Prime Minister as judgment. The one thing that he can sort of hold on to, I think, at the moment in some sort of salvage his position is that I don't think there are many people watching this programme tonight who think of Dominic Cummings as Mother Teresa. This isn't an attack on the Prime Minister from someone with much public standing. And I think Downing Street will hope that because of that, they can get away with it. But the issue that Susie has just raised is really incredibly important. It's been something that people have speculated on for a long time is that we all suspect that the Prime Minister's outgoings are quite a lot more than the Prime Ministerial salary that the taxpayers pay him. And how is the difference between those two things made up? The redecoration of Downing Street is the most obvious thing that we've been able to latch onto, journalists have been able to latch onto to say, how was this funded? But the worry, I think, if I was Boris Johnson, would be how many more questions are now going to be asked about that rumoured gap between earnings and expenditures.
Just before we get to the break, Susie, let's have a look at the last front page on this topic. The Daily Telegraph, again, Cummings declares war on Prime Minister. I've just been sitting here thinking, do you need to have a kind of a person who behaves in a Dominic Cummings fashion, acting as chief advisor, chief of staff? Gordon Brown had one, you know, Tony Blair had one, Theresa May arguably had 1.5. I mean, it does feel like there's a bit of a theme here.
Yes, it does appear to be that, you know, if you are tough enough to sort of be by the side of a prime minister or a putative prime minister, then they are happy to give you the job of doing all the difficult things and having the hard conversations and knocking heads together. And there doesn't seem to be any sort of nuance in that. You're either an absolute headbanger or you don't get the job. And that seems to be a great pity. But I think one of the points that Tim raised there is really important, actually, and which at the end of all this is going to be more relevant perhaps to the voters, which is that how it is Boris Johnson, who relied so much on Dominic Cummings for years now through Brexit and general elections and everything else, and who expended so much of his own political capital to protect him over the Barnard Castle business, is prepared at this stage of the game to apparently personally ring up Fleet Street editors and brief them that this is the mole and attack someone who was formerly his bagman and his chief enforcer. You only do that if something far, far worse is going to happen. And to pick a fight with Dominic Cummings, I would have thought anyone who's ever tried to get into, I can't remember the name of it now, that nightclub in the northeast where he used to be a bouncer would probably tell you that was quite a bad idea. And just looking at the guy's beady eyes there, and I wouldn't pick a fight with him on a dark night. Why the Prime Minister thought it was a good idea to start having a go at him, he knows where the bodies are. It's beyond me.
Susie, Tim, we will pause there for just a second, but after the break... Oh, God, the camera's over there. Perhaps I need a drive to Barnard Castle as well. Will it be necessary to keep wearing masks this summer? That depends who you ask. We'll be discussing it next.
I grew up in a small village in Zimbabwe, and indeed, it's been a long journey to get to where I ended up at the United Nations. But I always knew from a very young age that this is what I wanted to do with my life, because at the age of 8, a severe drought hit our village and left us with nothing to eat and nothing to drink. And one day I collapsed on the ground and I couldn't move. I actually thought I was going to die. But then this incredible thing happened. An aid worker with the UN found me. She gave me a bowl of porridge and literally saved my life. And this was the moment that sparked my dream. And I thought, well, gosh, perhaps one day I too can just be like her and save the lives of others. And so here we are. I ended up being raised by my aunt, and my aunt was a medical doctor in Zimbabwe, and she ran some of the largest HIV/AIDS clinics. And I started volunteering there because I also realized that if this issue was impacting my community, my own country, my own people, then I ought to play my part in being part of the solution. And so that sort of just continued to build on my desire to do more for the world. Better gender equality is needed in every single country around the world. I mean, we still live in a world where not even one country has been able to achieve gender equality. So it's not an Africa issue alone. It's a global issue, and that needs to be addressed. We need more women in positions of power so that they can also make decisions that benefit women and girls. But I'm also a very strong advocate for true solidarity. And at the UN, I created a movement called He for She, which really recognized that men had to be part of the solution. I think we're all sick and tired of living in a world where every time something devastating happens to a woman, we have to ask the question, what was she wearing? Well, perhaps the men shouldn't do that. And there are a lot of good men who want to do just that. They want to be on the right side of history and want to create a gender equal world. So we have to involve everyone. Within 3 days of launching He for She, we saw at least one man in every single country in the world join the movement. And within the first 5 days, there was 1.2 billion online conversation, which just told me that there's a lot more good men out there who want to do the right thing. And we just have to find a way to.
Welcome back to the press preview. Tim, to you first this quarter. The front page of the Daily Express, their story, smile, no masks by the summer. It feels I don't know what it is, but it feels slightly weird given what we've been seeing, particularly in India and, of course, in parts of Europe over the past few weeks.
Yeah, those pictures from, we've been talking about this Dominic Cummings affair, but those pictures from India are beyond heart-wrenching. And I think there will be lots of people who have been nervous about COVID who will be very nervous about this story. But overall, though, I think it is a good thing that we can look forward to this. And it is, for all of the question marks about the government's ethical behaviour at the moment, the vaccine rollout has been a huge success. If anything, the success of the vaccine has been understated. Its efficacy is enormously encouraging, and it probably will be safe for us largely to stop wearing masks quite soon. But of course, we've also seen flu and other things heavily reduced, partly because of the use of masks. So there'll be plenty of people, whatever the official guidance says, will continue to wear masks, I think, for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, Susie, what is your feeling as to where the country generally is on the continued wearing of masks? I mean, we regularly get polls on this, and it does show, most people seem quite sanguine, if not entirely happy, to keep wearing them for the greater good.
Yeah, I can't see me ever not wearing a mask on the London Underground if I ever go on it again at some point in the future, probably for the rest of my days. I certainly never touch a handrail on there because I think we've all become amateur virologists in the past year, and it's probably worth bearing in mind. I mean, hopefully we can start getting rid of the mask and everything else, but it's worth bearing in mind that the previous waves that we've had of this illness have been sort of sparked and seeded by middle-class holiday makers. First time people going skiing in northern Italy last winter, and then secondly people going on holiday in Spain over the summer when the restrictions were eased. And we had waves of the illness afterwards each time. Now, we didn't have vaccines then, but we also only had the one variant. Now we have many. So
everyone should
I'd be cautious.
Everyone should have stayed at home and watched the press preview instead of going on holiday. That's my view.